Did you think I wouldn't know?
Is The Shadow a hidden gem? Yes and no. Look, I unbridledly love this movie, but that love resides within very specific details. Growing up with the film, my admiration for the character, some absolutely spectacular cinematography, and probably my favorite Jerry Goldsmith score are usually the elements that come to mind when it's brought up. There's no denying the other side of that coin, though. The story's not great. Despite the stellar cast, the performances don't exactly blow me away. It's technically not even Universal's first shadow-based production, so why do I defend this film, and what about it amplifies the positive aspects in my memory? Hell, why haven't we had a shadow movie since? It's been over 30 years. The answers are complicated. There's only one man who knows.
The Shadow knows.
In the opium fields of Tibet, a ruthless American crime lord named Lamont Cranston operates under the alias Ying Ko. One evening, he's abducted and brought to a temple where the Tulku scolds him on his evil heart. There has always been conflict inside Cranston as he lost the battle with his own darkness. The Tulku offers redemption, a way to channel that darkness toward bringing justice to the world. Yinko refuses and battles a living purba knife before the Tulku tells him he has no choice. Lamont Cranston will be redeemed. Several years later, Cranston fights crime in New York City as the mysterious Shadow, an almost mythic figure with the ability to cloud men's minds and fade from visibility, leaving only a shadow. When a man named Shiwan Khan arrives in New York, he claims to be the last living descendant of Genghis Khan and yields all the same telepathic powers as the Shadow. Khan was taught by the same Tulku Cranston learned from, but didn't leave behind his evil ways. He killed the Tulku and took possession of the Purba. Utilizing the research of War Department scientist Reinhard Lane, Shiwan vows to destroy the city with an atomic bomb. As Lamont tries to stop him, the wealthy playboy discovers a strong mental connection to Lane's daughter, Margot. The Shadow character has a long and storied history that helped set the roots for what eventually became the superhero archetype. Batman co-creator Bill Finger straight up admitted he borrowed several elements from the Vigilante for early Dark Knight stories. Everything started out simple for the Shadow. At first, all he was an intimidating voice and ominous laugh. In 1930, the character was first heard on Street and Smith's Detective Story Hour radio program. He was originally only meant to introduce each episode, but soon gained popularity among listeners, eclipsing the show itself. Looking to capitalize, Street and Smith gave the character his own pulp magazine that launched in 1931. Walter B. Gibson was hired on to write the novels twice a month under the pseudonym Maxwell Grant. This would continue on for the next 2 decades. By 1937, the Shadow had his own radio show, with a young Orson Welles playing the lead.
The Shadow knows.
There were distinct differences between the literary Shadow and the one heard on the radio. For example, Pulp Shadow was more cold-blooded. Kent Allard was also eventually revealed to be the character's real name, with a backstory as a World War I pilot. Even then, much of his origin was left ambiguous. Lamont Cranston was a rich doppelganger of Allard's that he impersonated while working in New York. There's more to it, but that's the gist. The radio program simplified things with Cranston as the true identity. It also expanded on the Shadow's supernatural psychic powers and introduced Margot Lane. The pulps would eventually add Margot in the 1940s. This period represents the character at its peak. The radio drama would extend into the 1950s with the pulp novels right alongside it. The Shadow was well known to the public on multiple fronts. One of those fronts in the early years was actually cinema. A series of 6 short films based on the Detective Story Hour were distributed by Universal Pictures in 1931 and 32. They featured the Shadow introducing each short just as he did over the radio.
This is the Shadow.
1937 and 38 saw the character star in a pair of hour-long films. Then came the Columbia Pictures-produced 15-chapter serial in 1940. A few more theatrical releases followed, along with television pilots that weren't picked up, one of which was released as a film in 1958. Street and Smith was sold to Condé Nast Publications in 1959, which is where the Shadow's ownership rights remain as of 2025. From the 60s to the early 90s, the character remained viable mostly through comic book runs and crossovers with characters like Batman. DC had several series featuring the Vigilante, but a modern big-budget cinematic interpretation would soon look to become the definitive version of the Shadow.
The Shadow really was the prototype. He was the first anti-hero in pop American literature. It took me 12 years to make.
That was producer Martin Bregman speaking on his long road to bring a childhood favorite to the silver screen. He purchased the film rights in the early 80s, but had trouble finding the right mood for his adaptation. Bregman was known for producing some of Al Pacino's hit films post-Godfather, like Serpico, Dog Day Afternoon, Scarface, and Carlito's Way. The Shadow was a long-standing passion project for him. Finding the right collaborators proved difficult, though. At one point, Robert Zemeckis was attached to direct. Sam Raimi was also a huge fan of the character and tried getting his vision off the ground. His attempts did bear some fruit, as they led to the 1990 film Darkman. The scripts Bregman was given during development weren't landing, as they featured a variety of tones that he wasn't keen on. In 1990, David Koepp was hired to take a shot at the script. He was under contract at Universal at this point and wasn't known for writing big films just yet. However, since it took so long to make The Shadow, 1992's Death Becomes Her and 1993's Jurassic Park had come the writer's way. He also wrote Carlito's Way for Bregman during this time. By 1994, he was one of the industry's hottest screenwriters. Koepp was familiar with The Shadow from childhood, as he listened to reruns of the radio show on Sunday nights. He wasn't aware of the pulps before beginning research, so he went back and familiarized himself. His script was meant as a hybrid of different aspects from the two mediums, but the tone was more akin to the radio program. The writer didn't base his plot on anything specific from pre-existing material. He came up with an original story, but consulted Bregman every step of the way. The producer had a heavy sway on just about everything concerning the creative direction of the picture. The scribe honed in on the Shadow's famous catchphrase as the crux of his story.
Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The Shadow knows.
He asked the question how the Vigilante knew of such evil. Was it because it was once present in his own heart? The main character's inner struggle took shape as a redemption arc. Lamont Cranston felt guilty of his past sins and attempted to make up for them as the Shadow. Koepp had his central hook. Russell Mulcahy got his start as a music video director for acts like AC/DC, Paul McCartney, Billy Joel, and Elton John. In 1986, he directed the cult classic Highlander, as well as its 1991 sequel. He first teamed up with Martin Bregman on the HBO film Blue Ice, then again for 1993's The Real McCoy. It was there they developed a rapport and shared their love for The Shadow after Mulcahy inquired about the project. The director had earned the job. David Koepp had written the Lamont Cranston role for Alec Baldwin. The actor was already an admirer of Koepp's work, and after reading the script, he was enthusiastic about becoming involved. In rehearsals, Alec would come up with lines on the spot, and Koepp would incorporate them into the script. Baldwin was able to inject a lot of his own personality into the part, and that definitely came across on screen. The Shadow had its dedicated, identifiable star, but the rest of the cast featured other recognizable faces. Ian McKellen, Tim Curry, Jonathan Winters, Peter Boyle, John Lone, and Penelope Ann Miller formed a more than respectable supporting group. Miller had just worked with Bregman, Koepp, and cinematographer Stephen H. Burham on Carlito's Way and was excited for the period piece. Before accepting the role of Police Commissioner Wainwright Barth, Jonathan Winters requested Alec Baldwin call him so they could sort out the character's personality. After talking to his on-screen nephew, Winters accepted. The film shot mostly on Universal's backlot starting in the fall of 1993. The deadly Northridge earthquake on January 17, 1994, destroyed at least one set and shut down production for 2 weeks as they were forced to move locations. The earthquake wasn't the only case of turbulence on set, according to Alec Baldwin. He appeared on his brother Steven's One Bad Movie podcast recently and admitted Martin Bregman may have overstepped as a producer.
That movie was not a good movie, and because it wasn't one person's vision. Russell Mulcahy was the director, but Marty intruded too much. It was not like one person's vision, which a movie has to be that. Marty was a very intrusive producer.
We know that Bregman was very devoted to this project and had been trying to make it for over a decade. Considering his affection for the character, I could see him trying to force things a certain way as shooting progressed. Baldwin didn't elaborate, but it makes one wonder what exactly the director and producer disagreed on. The shadow can feel oddly uneven at times, so perhaps that's the result of two separate visions clashing. Director of photography Stephen H. Burham was aiming for a film noir look to his cinematography. He wanted the shots to take on the appearance of classic 1930s pictures and used old-fashioned lighting techniques to get there. He later said he ideally would have shot in black and white, but Universal nixed the suggestion. Burham was also hoping to capture the film in the anamorphic format, but because of the still emerging computer-generated effects in parts of the film, the VFX house didn't yet have the technology to handle that task. In the end, the shadow became a mix of old-school practical effects with cutting-edge CG. Sometimes the newer effects work, sometimes they stick out like a sore thumb. When shooting concluded, Jerry Goldsmith began his work on the music. If you're not familiar with him, Goldsmith was one of the greatest composers ever, with way too many credits to name, ranging from the 1950s through his death in 2004 and beyond. Many of his themes were used well into the 21st century by popular franchises, from Star Trek to Rambo. He's also the composer of this little ditty. Thus, he's a massively important part of Universal's history. That fanfare is among the most well-known of all the Hollywood studios. Goldsmith's Shadow score is my personal favorite of his because it blends dark, brooding, bombastic orchestral movements with electronic synth to create something truly unique, especially for a film set in the 1930s. That rising pitch indicating the presence of the shadow is so damn good. It's simple in the best way, setting the stage for the eerie atmosphere the main character creates. But the titular vigilante's signature theme is top of the heap. One of the best pulp hero, superhero, comic book, whatever, pieces of music I feel like no one ever talks about. I listen to it all the time. It is outstanding in its sense of mystery, power, and daring. Despite everything the Shadow had going for it, the film's target release date of July 1st, 1994 would provide historic competition that Universal likely wasn't ready for. Khan has used his telepathic abilities to position himself as a formidable force within New York, holding many, including Reinhardt Lane, under his control. The villain functions out of the Hotel Monolith, an establishment thought demolished but actually hidden from visibility through Shiwan's citywide hypnotism. After failed attempts to lure Cranston to his side, Khan enacts his plan and puts NYC on notice. Unless billions in ransom are delivered, the entire metropolis will burn through Khan's atomic bomb. The Shadow and Margot Lane work together to unravel the criminal's plot. As Cranston finally bests Shiwan in a psychic battle, Margot rescues her father. Reinhardt bumbles through disarming the bomb, and Khan is put away in a mental institution following a portion of his frontal lobe being removed. It was the part of the brain used for telepathy. Lamont and Margot then continue their relationship in a city spared of destruction. The 4th of July weekend wasn't optimal for the Shadow, as it had to go up against the materializing juggernaut that was The Lion King. Disney's latest animated feature was in its third week of release and had already grossed over $100 million domestically, taking the top spot again. This was also the fourth week of the Keanu Reeves action classic Speed. The Shadow just edged it out in second place for an $11.7 million debut haul. Unfortunately, the pulp characters flick didn't have the legs it needed, as it fell victim to another classic in its second weekend, Forrest Gump. Then True Lies came out the following weekend, and The Mask was released a couple weeks later. Yeah, The Shadow had no chance. It finished with a $31 million domestic gross against a $40 million budget. Audiences weren't enthralled with what they were given. From what I've gathered, The Shadow wasn't hated at the time, but viewers just didn't connect with it. Critics gave the film mixed to negative reviews, with some publications like Entertainment Weekly later listing it as one of the worst comic book movies ever. A planned Super Nintendo game was completed but never released because of the poor box office receipts. It has since leaked and is playable if you search around online. From the footage I've seen, it doesn't look too bad. There was also one of those handheld games by Tiger Electronics available. I had a few Tiger games back in the day, and this certainly looks like one of them. Just this year, I found out about the Shadow pinball game while at Midwest Gaming Classic in Milwaukee. My eyes nearly popped out of my head when I saw it, and I was able to play a few rounds. I'm no pinball expert, but this was a lot of fun, with a few aspects I hadn't seen much of, like the upper playfield. The art is exactly what I would have expected. The plunger is in the form of one of the Shadow's silver pistols, a great detail. It was very loud in the game room, so I couldn't hear much of the sound effects or supposedly new dialogue from John Lone, Penelope Ann Miller, and Tim Curry. If there was one pinball machine I'd ever want to own, this might be it. James Luceno wrote a novelization for the film. As of the writing of this video, I'm about halfway through, and it's pretty good so far. The added details really flesh things out in a positive way. Luceno did make an interesting choice of going with the original Pulp's backstory for the Shadow, naming him as Kent Allard. Lamont Cranston is the identity he assumes while in New York. While this movie is far from being universally liked, it does have its defenders and fans. The Shadow is often compared to releases like Disney's The Rocketeer or The Phantom starring Billy Zane. I'd even throw the 1990 Captain America film, The Meteor Man, and the Nicholas Hammond Spider-Man TV movie in that same category. Maybe the live-action Ninja Turtle sequels too. At least the third one. There's something about that stage of lower-grade comic book-type movies that was distinct. If you wanted to expand your horizons on live-action superhero fare outside of Batman and Superman, these were some of your only real options in the 90s. 2000's X-Men and 2002's Spider-Man would soon change all that, though. Still, The Shadow was part of its own distinct era that people my age can clearly recall. This movie was probably my first exposure to the character, but it opened the door to all that history I mentioned earlier. My love for The Shadow, and this movie specifically, has only increased over the years. I own some of the Orson Welles radio show on cassette tape, if you can believe it. I've also dabbled into some of the comic book adaptations, but I haven't been dazzled by anything I've read. Although, Dynamite's Twilight Zone crossover from 2016 was fun in a meta way. If you've got any suggestions on a good Shadow run, let me know in the comments. The biggest strength I can highlight about the film is how incredible it looks. It's one of my favorite looking movies ever. A lot of that has to do with Stephen Burham's cinematography, and I can totally see why he wanted to shoot this in black and white. It would have fit the world perfectly. Maybe a splash of color here and there with the Shadow's scarf or something. Just as important as the gorgeous cinematography is the production design, art direction, and costuming. Production designer Joseph Nemec made these sets look spectacular. I love how New York appears here. They really nailed that 30s film motif with stylistic backgrounds that sport an Art Deco flair. When they expand into Batman-ish territory with some of the more gothic cityscape sequences, I'm still astonished. Why couldn't we see the Shadow standing on that gargoyle in the rain? Would have been great. Additional credit to art directors Jack Johnson, Dan Olisewicz, Stephen Wolfe, and set decorator Garrett Lewis. Bob Ringwood was the costume designer on the Burton Schumacher Batman films, among many other productions, and his attention to detail with the characters' outfits further immersed the viewer in the slightly exaggerated time period. The Shadow himself looks excellent. The added prosthetics to make Alec Baldwin appear closer to early artist renderings of the character isn't necessary, but it's cool for accuracy's sake. I actually have to shout out the makeup department for that dream sequence where Lamont rips off his own face. It's one of those moments in this movie that has never left me. There's another that I literally think might be one of the single coolest scenes in movie history. The bridge sequence. Every second of that scene is flawless. The shots, the acting, the picture and sound editing, the music, that reveal shot, the Shadow firing at the concrete, kicking the crap out of Duke, it's just the absolute best. But it also meant the movie peaked early. There aren't any official deleted scenes that I could find, but websites like shadowsanctum.net cross-reference the novelization with promotional material to surmise what was left on the cutting room floor. Some of it could have at least improved the focus on Lamont's dark side that we barely see him struggle with in the final picture. That was clearly the heart of the script, and it's just not given the proper attention. This robs the story of a substance that was desperately needed. The structure and pacing of the film doesn't do a great job at building tension either. We move from scene to scene with the bare minimum and hardly explore this amazing-looking world. Like the Hotel Monolith, that could and should have been a bigger deal. It's a fantastic backdrop for the Shadow to battle his enemies. That scene with Tim Curry's Farley Claymore in the ballroom was the ideal way to use the set and characters. It would have been nice to watch a few more of those instances with other henchmen. I want to see the Shadow be the Shadow, not outsmarted by a low-level thug and locked in a water tank. I wanted more grit from our hero. A couple short sequences seeing him break up a few robberies or infiltrate a drug ring or something would have went a long way. I guess what I'm saying is, more Shadow with more characterization for Lamont. Maybe less focus on everyone's psychic powers.
Next time, you get to be on top.
And less of that too. Yeah, the humor in this movie almost never works. There are a couple places where it hits, but it mostly comes off awkward and forced.
You know what I love about this job? The excitement.
That still gets a chuckle out of me. And Cranston and Lane's bickering actually lands really well in one scene.
Last night, we agreed...
No, I didn't agree to anything.
Do you mind if I just get one tiny little sentence out here? Thank you very much.
We need each other.
No, we don't.
We have a connection.
No, we don't.
You can tell how natural that is. I wish Margot and Lamont had more of that kind of relationship throughout. She didn't need telepathic powers either. I don't understand why that was such a must. It cheapens the gimmick. She could have been a very intuitive, smart character without that element. Her motivation of saving her father is enough reason to have her at Cranston's side. Also, Penelope Ann Miller just feels miscast here. She looks the part, but doesn't have that edge or mystery I think Margot needed. They tried to make Lane a quirky femme fatale, but it just doesn't create a compelling enough dynamic. If they went all the way with Margot being the one shadow agent that can get under Lamont's skin, that may have been a better fit for the actress. As a villain, John Lone is hit and miss. Khan's given a great intro and follow-up scene. There's a twisted vibe invoked when we watch his victims lose control of their own minds, especially that driver gleefully accelerating into a tanker. Ji-won's established well as a real threat, but then they make him kind of goofy where he's very into American culture and eventually makes this face, which they had to know looked completely ridiculous. I also don't think Lone and Baldwin had good chemistry. They make some odd choices in their interactions with each other.
You know I'm gonna stop you.
You think your meaningless, decadent country is the new cradle of civilization,
Hey,
something?
that's the US of A you're talking about, pal.
Khan is obviously supposed to represent the inverse of Cranston's arc. He embraces the same darkness they both share, while the shadow keeps it in check. I understand, but there's something missing. Also, the Perba knife is a cool design, but it being alive looks stupid. It looks stupid. The rest of the supporting cast is a bit wasted. This is the most subdued performance I may have ever seen Ian McKellen give, and he's fine, but we know he was capable of much more. If they wanted comedy, why not give more of that material to Jonathan Winters and Peter Boyle? They could have handled it great, but they're not in the movie very much. At least Tim Curry's charisma is intact. This vast network the Shadow has at his disposal is such a fascinating idea, but they only really scratch the surface with it. So many concepts like that just aren't given the appropriate amount of screen time. It can be a frustrating experience to rewatch this film because the potential is there. If they went right instead of left on a few occasions, this all may have been exponentially improved. There is a legit good movie in there. You can almost see it. Acknowledging those shortcomings, the moments and components that do work are stunning. I'll never get enough of it. I still wish they did a years later sequel. I don't care how old Alec Baldwin is. Make him a grizzled old crime fighter who uses his agents to battle evil instead of his silhouette. Maybe he has to pass on the shadow mantle. Whatever, just make it. There's got to be a streaming service out there who'd put that on. If the Shadow showed up on screen since 1994, maybe I wouldn't feel that way, but he hasn't. It's been a 3-decade drought. Sam Raimi was again attached to a Shadow movie in the mid-2000s, but that never went anywhere. Sure, there have been more comics, and it's not like the fans have forgotten the character, but he's ripe for more screen adaptations. Come on, somebody get on this. There's a glimmer of hope, if you want to call it that, with a deal announced by Condé Nast in 2020. James Patterson, Brian Sitz, and Richard DiLallo have written a trio of novels that, according to Bill Robinson of James Patterson Entertainment, will, quote, plot the course of the Shadow's return to the screen, unquote. The novels were released in 2021, 2023, and 2025, respectively. The concept sends the Shadow 150 years into a future New York City. I can't judge these works because I haven't read them, but as a Shadow fan, I don't want to see that character in the far future. I want to see him in the 1930s taking down gangsters and the occasional supernatural threat. Maybe have him get involved in World War II and fight some Nazis. He's tied to that era and functions best in that era. There's no reason why we can't see a full film noir shadow feature on the big screen nowadays. The character goes into the public domain in 2027, so I'm hoping something big happens with him soon. Until then, the 1994 film will have to suffice. Its best moments make it a worthy watch and an underappreciated visual treat. Thanks to the collector's edition Blu-ray by Shout Factory and all the old articles and footage gathered together by the Shadow's agents over the years, the sun is shining.
But the ice is slippery.
Check out the Walter Culture YouTube channel for more content. Next time on Juniversal, we smash our way into the 21st century. Maybe I'll even get angry, who knows?
I'll know.